People think mental illness is behavioral, and it is actually a medical illness like a stroke or a neurological illness. It's something that is happening in the body. And yes, not all of our treatments work perfectly, but it's treatable because it's biological.
How to be patient.
Preston, how are you doing today?
I'm doing fantastic. I'm excited to ride along for another Margaret-led episode. This time with a guest.
Well, you can ask questions this time. I won't be drilling into you about psychoanalytic therapy this time.
Okay.
But yes, I am really excited for our guest we have on. It's Dr. Jhilam Biswas, MD. I know Dr. Biswas from real life and from training and residency. She is also a forensic psychiatrist. You are president of Massachusetts Psychiatry Society at this point, right? You're no longer president-elect. You are president.
That's right.
As well as being in the Mass General Brigham Harvard Fellowship, Leadership and Teaching in Forensic Psychiatry. And we are so excited to have you on. You're such a resource. And did I miss anything? I know I'm sure I missed a lot of things in your introduction.
Yeah, so we were just bonding over the money tree that she has in the background. It's the same as mine. It really balances out all the other like diplomas and decorum in her backdrop.
Preston, you don't have a single diploma back there.
No, mine is all just plants.
Oh my God, it was the only wall I had.
But if I had a diploma, it would go there.
If he had a diploma. Oh my God. Well, we're so excited to have you on. We are going to be talking about prison-based psychiatric care as well as how that has turned in your career to advocacy as well as leadership. But I wanted to start with a basic question for all of us to kind of do as our icebreaker. As our listeners know, we always start with that. But I don't know how much people outside of psychiatry considering going into forensic psychiatry know what a forensic psychiatrist is or like what it's the like questions that just general mental health practitioners have about this stuff. So our icebreaker for all three of us is, what has been your introduction and your training to forensics or working in either a prison setting or where you're more interfacing with like law? So Dr. Biswas, you're going to have a much more than we will, I'm sure. But what was your introduction to this kind of work, I guess?
Oh my gosh. Well, that is such a great question. And I'm sure so much is going to come out in this podcast in terms of all of this. But I think to answer your first question, the formal answer to what forensic psychiatry is, and to be honest, I don't even think most psychiatrists know what it is. I certainly didn't know going through residency and kind of learned about it in my third year and was like, I think this is it. This is what I want to do. The forensic psychiatry is the study of psychiatry and the law. And what that boils down to is people with mental illness, particularly those with serious mental illness, end up intersecting and kind of becoming entangled with the legal system for various reasons. And we can talk about that, whether it's through, criminal issues that come up, kind of unpredictable, violent behavior, or guardianships, or capacity, or being able to write a will, being unduly influenced. What else can I think of? Psychological distress from an accident that needs to be articulated to the court. So people in a moment where they are dealing with mental health issues are often dealing with other social institutions outside of a hospital, right? And so what I tell my fellows and residents is that forensics is CL for society, or consult liaison psychiatry for society.
I like that.
And right? Yeah. I'm like, maybe I should coin that term, but
patent it.
Maybe I just did. But it's really providing consultation and education to social systems on mental illness, whether they be courts or the state house or the legislation or jails, schools. I'm just kind of thinking through places where I've had to do this, and it comes up in
essentially
so
everywhere
many
in the
different
community.
It really does. I practiced college health for a while during my career as well. And I found so many times, not only was I doing college health work, but I was often asked by the deans or, somebody outside to say, can this student come back to school?
Mm,
Is the student mentally well to come back to their clinical rotations, and it's not necessarily medical rotations, but other rotations where you do clinical rotations after a leave of absence. And so there's just so many ways in which psychiatrists need to provide evaluation, consultation, and recommendations to a question outside of treatment. And I feel
mm.
like that's what forensic psychiatrists do. But I do find that my job is always evolving as a forensic psychiatrist.
Do you remember, first of all, I think that is like the best like definition I've gotten because there is so much that as you go through training, you learn like this is something that you shouldn't do as a general psychiatrist because we need someone specially trained, or like this is a setting it happens in for, different aspects, often in the emergency setting. That is like the main place I feel like
Right.
clinically you might run into it as a resident. But do you remember like one of your first, you mentioned like you thought third year this might be it. Is there a specific clinical situation or like topic you were learning or researching about that made you feel like, oh, this is clicking for me in a way?
Totally, totally. And so I'll bookmark the third year of residency because that was another pivot moment. But I don't think I ever really knew what I was doing. And
That's relatable.
I mean, right? Like I really feel like my whole life has been beginner's mind. I'm like, oh, that's so cool. And then I find myself going down another path and another path. But as coming to this point in time, I feel like you do a lot of connecting the dots and you're like, oh, that's how this interest came to be. And it was actually one of my mentors at the Brigham who pointed it out to me one day where I had told this mentor that I was a sociology major in college. And I just got I was just very interested in social systems. And that's, I think, where it started.
Mm,
Is I was very interested in social systems, and I realized like I wanted to really understand health systems. And then I was very interested in global health issues and how do we provide care kind of rather than not just patient to patient, but in a macroscopic way. How do we task share so we can provide care for large swaths of people in places where they can't get care? So I found myself getting interested in sociology and then interested in global health. And that's kind of why I went into medical school. I thought it was going to be an OBGYN. So I went into medical school saying, I'm going to do women's health. And that's why I'm going to be a doctor. And then I went to medical school and I was like, no, I actually love family medicine because I love treating the whole patient. And then my very last rotation was psychiatry. And I was like, oh, this is awesome because this is where I get to sit with all the juicy stuff of of what the patient really wants me to hear and what they want me to help them with.
Well, what better way to treat the whole patient than to take a look at how they sit in society? Like, it's not just the whole patient in the context of the nuclear family, but their circumstance as a member who lives in a community of humans.
That is so true. And that's, I think, what it was. It was like psychiatry was the deep dive into a person. But then as I was doing psychiatry residency, I was like, but I like this deep dive, but I wanted to have kind of social impact in a way that I love psychodynamic therapy, and I did a lot of exploring of that in residency, along with global mental health work. But I was kind of like, where can I make a little bit more impact in what I know to be true? But I feel like the world doesn't really know. The world doesn't really understand psychiatric illness, and I feel like
mm,
we start to, and then we realize the world doesn't really jive with everything that we know. And so I had this rotation my third year of residency with Dr. Tom Gutile, who did the psychiatry and law. He had his book that he had written, and that was the course. And so he would give everybody his book, and each week we would read a chapter of his book, and he would be like, "Just tab out any questions you have about anything, and I will answer them." And then every week we would ask him a million questions from that chapter, and he's just an incredible mentor too. and now at Mass Mental in his 80s, but he coined the term never worry alone.
He like actually coined it, right? Like people say that, but like he like actually maybe coined
No,
it.
he coined it. He wore it on a t-shirt one time that said never worry alone at our forensic conference called American Academy of Psychiatry and Law. He was like known to go to the forensic conferences every year. Like everybody's dressed up in suits because, you know, they're expert witnesses that testify in court. And he's like in Birkenstocks and a t-shirt that says never worry alone.
That's awesome.
It was amazing. He did the best job in kind of making forensic psychiatry accessible. And I think it was in the t-shirt and the Birkenstocks, but he made it accessible for me, I would say. In the way that he just handed out the textbook that he had written and he was like, ask me anything and I'll sign it at the end of the year. And I was like, I just really find this interesting. Like, I find it interesting that we can educate people outside of the hospital walls, not just in consult liaison. We often educate other primary teams, other medical teams, but like here, you're telling you get to talk to the judge, you get to talk to a legislator, you get to talk to a dean, and you get to help them understand. And maybe and I found that to be really interesting. And I realized back, maybe it comes from my interest in social systems and sociology, but that's kind of what helped me enter into forensic psychiatry.
That's fine. Like the city council is the primary team in this situation. They're like,
Yeah.
hey, we've got a consult. We have mental health consult for you. Oh yeah.
That's exactly right. The city council is my consult team.
Preston, what's your experience been with forensics so far in your training?
It's actually been pretty condensed. I've had mentors that I've done, or maybe not mentors, but just like attendings that I've rotated with. I've done forensic psychiatry fellowships, and I think the interesting part is they had not been practicing forensic psychiatry, so they all had different opinions about it. And the only context that I really was familiar with it was in the context of not guilty by reason of insanity. So whenever we would have this question of competency for someone who has committed some sort of crime, people would say, oh, that's up to a forensic psychiatrist to decide. You go in front of the court and do a lot of like judge-related things, blah, blah, blah. And that was kind of how it was down to me.
Judge-related things is awesome.
and I was like, oh, yeah,
True.
yeah, judge, etc. Sounds
wrong.
good. The only other thing that I knew is people would talk about these like large case reports, because I would say like, oh, I think this sounds like kind of interesting. I'd like to do it. And they're like, someone told me, and I guess I'm saying these like negative things that have been said about it because I really am excited to hear you dispel them or just kind of like offer your opinion. But they would say, you know, it was really interesting for me to learn while I was in fellowship and I enjoyed the theory of it. But then when I got out into practice, it was like writing a dissertation once a week. And every week I was just so tired of like reading through hundreds of pages of documentation trying to formulate this. So it can be hard when you're practicing. And I was kind of like, oh, that sounds like a lot. But also you're describing kind of work as like a Swiss Army knife where you're going between articulating to juries to educating the public and then kind of navigating autonomy and all these things in between, which none of those really graced my ears when I was hearing the disgruntled opinions of my uppers. Mind you, this is while I'm just like trying to bury myself in like the daily progress notes I have on the weekend while I'm covering a unit. And I'm like, hey, how is forensic psychiatry, by the way?
Getting paged 80 times during.
So true.
Yeah.
I mean, it's all true and it's not that bad. I mean, it's so funny. Okay, so forensic psychiatry, the way I describe it is a deep dive. And what I fell in love with is I was finding myself having to do a deep dive on everybody as a psychiatrist in my patient group, but not getting the time needed to do that deep dive. And in forensics, you can take as much time as you want to do that. Right. And you bill for those hours. You don't it's a different type of work where the deep dive allows you to do a better job and makes a bigger impact. So you actually feel the rewards of doing that work. And it is true that the reports are long. I'm not going to lie. That part is true. But what I found my forensic fellows saying a lot of the time is like, yeah, but I feel like I really learned something out of that. And now I feel like I'm an expert in that area and I could do more of those and that I could do more cases like that. And it would be easier each time. And you do start to develop these areas of expertise, which is kind of cool.
Yeah, I think some people like being the submarine. They want to do the deep dive,
True.
and some people might not be like as built for it. Like you don't want to be the Titan submersible or that
No.
the
Nobody wants to be
vehicle that
that.
imploded. Yeah, when you go down, so maybe take your venture somewhere else. Okay, that makes sense.
I feel like my experience for forensics is like, smattering of things throughout in the emergency department, working with you at different points. But my experience is like I think from the outside was I in undergrad was like my dad is a primary care doctor, my mom's a lawyer, and I was like, which one do I want? I could have done other careers, but I was kind of in between the two because I liked English, and I liked helping people, which is overly cliche. But I did a like internship one summer after college at like the state's attorney's office, because my like in my like small town in Illinois, but worked on a case that was like a juvenile case where there had been an accident with a gun, basically. And it was an awful case, and there was a death, and also the question of like adolescent boys, like, are they responsible for this? Who's responsible for it? And I remember getting to the end of that summer and being like, I have got to get here earlier than the like, prosecution. But I feel like there can be that kind of carceral view when people hear forensic psychiatry or they hear, I'm sure you get all sorts of reactions when, I'm sure you don't tell people like on airplanes that you're like,
Yeah.
at different points when you've been more or less clinically working in um, like state prison systems or the carceral setting. After we take this break, we will come back and we'll talk a little bit about what that is like when you're clinically practicing in that setting, and then talking about how that your background in forensics, the work you do in forensics, and this view of CL to society has, I believe, led to some of your advocacy work and political work in 2025, where everything's kind of messy. So we will be right back.
So one podcast that I think all medical providers should be aware of is the Sepsis Spectrum by Sepsis Alliance. It's run by this great critical care provider, Nicole Kupchik. One thing Nicole does really well is she captures the human story within infection. Anytime a person's involved, there's going to be a story involved, and she finds a way to bring sepsis outside of the hospital. And she helps experts tell the stories of patients who have sepsis in the community and teaches you how to recognize signs when there's problems to bring them into the hospital. We know that 87% of sepsis starts in the community, so it's important to make the conversations there.
If we know anything, it's that as many reps as possible, hearing as many iterations of presentations is how we recognize it better and more quickly. And this podcast can help all of us with that. And you can listen to the Sepsis Spectrum wherever you get your podcast or watch it on Sepsis Alliance's YouTube channel. To learn how you can earn free nursing CE credits just by listening, visit sepsispodcast.org. So the question I'm curious about is, I know you, again, we've said Swiss Army knife, you do many things, you wear many hats at this point, but what is it like to practice psychiatry in a jail setting versus a prison setting? Because I think this is just something, even I don't know this at all, but what is a day in the life like?
Wow. Okay. So that is an interesting question. And
Well, I read your chapter in the Kaplan. So I was like,
so
didn't know to even ask
jails?
it.
Yeah, no, that's a really interesting question. I haven't been asked that before, but like a jail is more for if you're serving 2.5 years or less. If you're not getting a long sentence for a certain type of a crime, and prison sentences tend to be much longer, and for particular types of crimes that lead, that can be anything from uh, assault and battery, like a pretty rough one, to murder and arson and rape. So it can be, longer sentences. But the typical jail individual, there is a lot of mental illness in jails. And you'll hear about this just kind of around that. Some of our largest psychiatric hospitals in this country are jails: Cook County Jail, LA County Jail, Rikers in New York. Because a lot of, and this is kind of where my research, it gets me passionate about this issue, is that a lot of people with mental illness end up in situations where they're entangled with law enforcement due to the fact that they're not on regular treatment, or they're not treated at all, or they aren't able to engage due to their inability to have any insight into what's going on in their lives, as we know that a lot of serious mental illnesses have that component to the disease. And what ends up happening, and substance use, traumatic brain injury are two other really, really big reasons, and probably bigger reasons than mental illness, as to why people often end up in jails for heavier crimes that are violent in nature, or often, trespassing or robberies, things like that. So a jail can be a very busy place for a psychiatrist to do their work. There's just a lot going on, and there's a lot of patients. But really, at the end of the day, so are prisons. But what I think, a lot of psychiatrists find prison work really fulfilling. You get this longitudinal period of time to take care of a patient who may not have ever gotten care before. What I have found my fellows to say, and residents who have rotated at hospitals that are also prisons. Let me backtrack for a second and explain to you my clinical background before kind of being at an academic center and really running a forensic fellowship with my co-director, Dr. Matt LaHaye. I worked at Bridgewater State Hospital, which is actually, I think it's one of a kind. There may be one other one in Texas, where it's a Department of Corrections run institution that's a medium security prison. It's considered a medium security prison. And it also is a JACO accredited hospital. So it's a really bizarre combination, which a lot of people can't wrap their minds around. And there's a lot of advocacy around whether we should have something like Bridgewater or not. Like, should a hospital and a prison be the same thing? And that's a question for another day. We're not going to get into that. But what I have found is, wow, can you provide really good care sometimes to individuals who are in prison in a setting like that? And there's a lot of statutes in Massachusetts on how you can provide psychiatric care and do psychological evaluations, forensic evaluations, like not guilty by reason of insanity, which we call a criminal responsibility evaluation, or a competency to stand trial evaluation. So now this is so I have worked in this setting, which is a medium security prison, but with a lot of mental health care and a lot of medical care provided. So it's kind of a different place. But what I will say is kind of what psychiatrists who work in prison settings say a lot, and what I have experienced myself, is that you get a population that ends up being really grateful because they get to know you. They're often really ill when they first get there because of the circumstances that have led them to that situation. They often burn their bridges. They might be homeless, or they get better and you can reconnect them with their family members again. And then they start developing relationships with family members in a very contained way, where their families can come visit them, over a period of time, and actually get to know them and help them, maybe reintegrate back into the community. That's not everybody, but I've seen a lot of like really nice success stories in kind of the setting of being able to take care of a very sick person who then gets better, who recognizes the value of psychiatric care, and then goes on to do well in the community once they're discharged. And I think that's the most gratifying part of psychiatric work in prison systems.
Quick question. What makes someone end up in like Bridgewater? Like this unique situation? Like this is going to be maybe a crass way of asking this, but like how mentally ill do you have to be to end up there versus like seeing a psychiatrist in a prison setting that's not all, like, let's say in Massachusetts, not also in a hospital?
Yeah. When it pertains to your legal charge, I would say is one of the key ways to get into a place like a forensic hospital, whether it be Bridgewater or all states have some version of this, a forensic hospital that will take care of those individuals. They're stratified in different ways. But to get to Bridgewater, two reasons. You're either very seriously mentally ill and you need kind of medications and you're refusing them. That may land you in Bridgewater after you've been sentenced and you're serving your time in prison. That may land you in Bridgewater, but it won't be Bridgewater. It'll be there's another unit right next to Bridgewater for people who have prison sentences. But for everybody else, it will land you there when there's a question of, were you mentally ill at the time of the event that you committed this alleged incident? At that point, you need to be evaluated by a forensic psychologist or psychiatrist who will then do that evaluation for the state. And so if you're not, or so if like the NGRI, Preston, that you said, that's often somebody who'll end up at Bridgewater, and also somebody who probably is incompetent to stand trial. Like they're so ill, like it's not depression or anxiety that'll land you in Bridgewater unless the depression and anxiety cause some psychotic features that require an evaluation for the time of the event. Outside of that, it's you're so mentally ill that you probably won't be able to stand trial, and you need to be restored back to mental health so that you can stand trial and move on with your life. So in the legal system, and this is kind of getting into kind of the ins and outs of the law, you need to you cannot give due process and have a trial for an individual who cannot comprehend what's going on. They don't have a factual understanding, or they don't have a rational understanding of their alleged charges. Of their charges and their alleged crime. And so you need an evaluation for that. So those are kind of the three big mechanisms in which you land into a forensic hospital.
So when you're performing these evaluations, and let's say you find someone to be incompetent to stand trial, are you also the physician that helps restore that competency?
Now,
Like, are you both the evaluator and the cure?
awesome question. That was such a good question. No, you are never. Yes, because so this is something Tom Gutel has written much about. But you're
Evaluate
never
alone.
right. You evaluate alone, but
Just
you
like
don't worry
worrying, yeah.
alone. It's true. You don't provide the clinical care if you are the objective forensic evaluator. You can't wear both hats because there's a conflict of interest.
So what's that like if they're not your patient then? I guess that seems like a unique situation
Yeah.
where you're providing an assessment, but this isn't someone that's under your care, so to speak. I guess that was kind of like the second question that was followed by that.
Great question. You are the consultative team expert that is providing consultation on a question. So you are providing consultation on the question of, is this person actually competent to stand trial? You may offer recommendations for treatment because you're a doctor, but you will not follow through or carry out that treatment. You will only be able to provide consultation because the treating provider is a totally different role than the evaluator, who is much more objective. My job in an evaluation isn't to just listen to what the patient says and write it down on paper. My job is to push back on every detail that the patient says to make sure it's true with the collateral data that I have. Whereas a treating psychiatrist is really looking at the patient as a whole, really thinking about, what does this patient need from me and what can I provide for that person to live their best life or to do better and live their full potential. So it's two very different roles.
This is maybe a question that you will definitely not know off the top of your head, but knowing you actually might. Is there ever a resource issue with this kind of thing? Because I'm thinking of like where I'm from, like in like more middle southern Illinois, and like maybe in this case, right, you end up at the forensic hospital, so you're there, but like you need at least two forensically trained PhD or MD level people to do one of these cases. Is there, like, when the rubber hits the road, does every state have enough people to be able to do this, or like are there delays? How does that do we run into a resource issue even with just this?
We sure do. Where is there not an access issue in psychiatry and mental health care, right? So yes, of course, there is a huge resource issue in this situation. I think what you'll find is one psychiatrist, a clinical psychiatrist, will take care of a lot of patients, a lot of patients in a clinical setting. And then the forensic evaluator is a different person, and they'll just get assigned different cases that require different evaluations when it is in a forensic hospital. You can also be privately pulled in by the attorney on the case to say, look, this person has this legal case. I think they have some illness here, and you need to explain this to the court. And the attorney will bring you into the case as a forensic evaluator. So you come in through totally different paths as a forensic evaluator, whether that's a psychiatrist. Psychiatrists are often, forensic psychiatrists will get pulled in on all the medical, biological issues that come up in these cases. Forensic psychologists are very able to handle kind of competency to stand trial types of cases, criminal responsibility. It's one of these medication issues or serious mental illness with psychotic features, like things like that have a pretty clear-cut medical component with medical recommendations that forensic psychiatrists do that. So what's nice is you can task share a little bit when it comes to forensics, depending on the case. And the treatment is often provided by the psychiatrists and nurse practitioners that are working within the jails and the prisons, providing the clinical care.
And those people don't
Yeah.
need to be forensically trained to
No,
work in that setting. Okay.
they don't, but I have found more and more people get trained in that area because even when you're doing some documentation, it's good to know your jurisdiction and how to think about these cases. In a forensic hospital, I'll say most of the psychiatrists are forensically trained, but there's a lot of jails and prisons that are not forensic hospitals, and forensic psychiatrists are not in those spaces. It's just regular psychiatrists who aren't trained in that area. Addiction psychiatrists, a lot of addiction psychiatrists in that area.
Yeah, I was going to say, I feel like I'm thinking of that. I think one of the things that I wanted to touch on before we start talking about how your work's evolved is for a person who's like, let's say they're a med student, they're someone who's not a psychiatrist, they're not having exposure to forensic psychiatry. They're thinking about patients who are in the carceral setting that we treat. What do you feel like are the ethical balances that you're often considering or that come up the most in discussing treating patients in like the Bridgewater setting, in terms of balancing values of society, like you're saying, right, versus an individual's well-being, autonomy, beneficence, all of these things? That may be too broad of a question, but any themes that come up?
Yeah. Well, I think the first piece that comes up when you bring up a question like that is I think what I found myself ethically dealing with kind of in the carceral setting is helping everyone else understand this is mental illness. This is not behavioral. Sometimes I get mad at the word behavioral health because I'm like, isn't it kind of stigmatizing? It's like saying it's a behavior when it's truly mental illness. And we've also turned the word mental illness into mental health. And anyway, I'm not going to get into all of that, but there is something in which sometimes I often am so surprised when people can't see that this is psychotic illness or mania or bipolar illness. You'll be with correctional officers or other staff who are honestly, a lot of them are well-meaning, and I work with them, and they want to provide kind of compassionate security so the person can get care. But what you do find is you're doing a lot of education and helping people understand these are biological illnesses that require medications to stabilize. And I find myself saying that a lot in many, many different parts of my life and not just in corrections. But I think a lot of times people think mental illness is behavioral. And it is actually a medical illness like a stroke or or a neurological illness. And it's something that is happening in the body. And yes, not all of our treatments work perfectly, but it's treatable because it's biological.
what you're saying makes me think of like the split that like there's been destigmatizing in some ways of like mental health when it's like anxiety, depression. And I would say even with that, like mild to moderate anxiety and depression. And whereas there's been not any destigmatization of actually like knowing and holding in community people with like SMI. And Preston, it
Mhm.
actually reminds me of like the video you did when it was like a headphone company or something had a stigmatizing some ad they had that was like about
Mhm.
schizophrenia. And
Yeah, it was a headphone
yeah,
company. They made a joke that was like, not sure if you're passing someone on the sidewalk and they're listening to their headphones or they're just crazy. Because it was like, they were
Yeah.
talking. And like, are they talking to themselves, like responding to internal stimuli, or are they listening to our headphones?
mhm.
And that was just kind of like open and accepted. And I was like, I don't know. And so
It
like
is
in this
stigmatizing.
video, they were like basically imitating people with schizophrenia.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's what happens when it's behavioral and not
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
medical.
It just feels in poor taste where we can
Yeah.
destigmatize the equivalent of the common cold, I guess, for mental health. But then when you have things that are tantamount to
Tuberculosis.
malignancy or
Yeah.
something, yeah, no, that's still
That's a
Yeah.
behavior.
that's still
Like,
not touchable.
man.
Yeah. And to clarify for our listeners who maybe aren't as psychologically inclined, when you say behavioral versus mental illness, I think to the layperson that kind of sounds the same.
Right.
How
Right.
would you help someone understand the distinction between like what a volitional behavior is and the product of mental illness, actions that are the product of mental illness?
I'll tell you, I've done a deep dive into kind of thinking about serious mental illness and the carceral system and sort of the cycle that people with serious mental illness end up in. And in thinking a lot of, and then stigma and the social stigmas around that, and social stigmas around inpatient psychiatry and what kind of care we provide in those settings. And what I have come to realize is there's two types of mental illness: the kind with insight and the kind without insight. And that is the ultimate separation. People with insight to their mental illness or mental health issue will get care, want to get better, want to reach their highest potential, are really destigmatizing certain areas of mental illness like ADHD or OCD or depression and anxiety, some forms of PTSD, tic disorders, and lots of other things that I think are treatable, workable. People can get care and live a full life. And so there's that area which has really become destigmatized, which I think is wonderful. And then there's the illnesses where people can have insight, but sometimes lose insight. And I think it is that psychotic component that comes with certain serious mental illnesses like schizophrenia and bipolar disorder, and sometimes PTSD, and sometimes depression, and other illnesses that result in sort of a psychosis. Eating disorders, for example, can kind of land in that bucket, right? And it all divides down into insight, I think. And um, it is the population that doesn't have insight often will fall off their medication regimen or not engage with care or not believe in care, become too paranoid around care. And then it lands them in really negative situations. Um, and that gets more and more stigmatized because people are conflating the two types of illness. I feel like I'm kind of like fleshing this out as we're talking,
I love it.
but
I'm locked in right now with you.
yeah, and I think that it's this, we cannot conflate the two because the two require very different types of interventions. And I think the general population is trying to give one type of care to the other group that requires a very different type of intervention, compassion, and understanding of biological disease and the requirements of medication.
I wonder if there's almost a kind of social denial, not to go back to the psychodynamics, but in the culture of denial of mortality. And in this case, this like not just that it's maybe unpleasant or scary to see, not because of violence, which one of the papers that we have cited from you in our notes, the first sentence is like, people with mental illness are not inherently more violent, which I just want to say right now. But that there is this really, horrible and like almost existentially terrifying thing that if this can just happen to someone and you can't will your way out of it, you can't behave your way out of it, then that if you accept that and actually have compassion and work to make a world or community that can, you have to accept it that it could happen to you. And I think that like the denial in modern healthcare, especially in the US, of like, this can't happen to me. If I just do all the right things, nothing bad will ever overtake me, versus this could happen to any of us. How do we design a world and a government that can handle it? And I don't have to fear this person from an existential level.
Everyone likes to think I would do differently if I was in that situation. I hope that if I experience a manic episode, I would have the willpower, the behavior to pull myself out of it. Therefore, you must have it, because otherwise this is an impossibility for anyone to escape and makes us all equally vulnerable and mortal, which is a much, much scarier world to contemplate.
Yeah, it really is. And perhaps it's that denial that makes the stigma even more intense.
Ironic, because that means society doesn't have insight into it. It all comes down to insight.
It's true. It's the denial of our mortality, the denial of losing your mind. That is really scary. And what is scarier as a psychiatrist that's worked in this area is watching society allow that individual to stay in that state because they want to believe it's behavioral and not medical illness, and making it really hard for us to provide treatment like medications during a period of time where somebody has no insight but is in extreme distress around their psychotic illness.
And
that
I think
is
that's a
hard.
great segue into your paper that we discussed, which is treatment delayed is treatment denied.
Is also part of your
Yes.
advocacy work. We will take one more break and then we'll be right back to talk about that and also talk about one of the impressions constant rants online and offline, which is hating from outside the club. And I think that this gets into, and that Dr. Biswas talked about as well, dealing with very severe mental illness and kind of what comes up with it.
I really enjoyed the treatment delayed is treatment denied. And to kind of summarize for the listeners and also I guess for the author, which kind of, I feel like a kid at the front of the classroom right now being like, I read this paper and I know what it's about.
What I learned in boating school is.
Yeah. So the crux of the paper is that when you have people that have severe mental illness and they become involved in the legal system in some way, one of the issues becomes compelled medications or restoration of competency. And when we involuntarily commit someone to compelled medications, we're trying to uphold beneficence in opposition with autonomy, and we try to kind of continuously uphold the patient's autonomy along this whole weird bureaucratic process. But paradoxically, we can't apply the same principles that we do with autonomy in other medical situations. So we talked a lot about kind of substitution of interests being one way that we kind of try to swap out, which is, what would I want if I was in your shoes, or assuming that, you were of sound state of mind. An example of this would be like, if I was unconscious and brought into the emergency department, I would hope that people would still want to operate on me or intubate me or something to keep me alive, because I'd be of sound mind and awake. But if you're of sound mind, then you're not mentally ill, so you wouldn't need treatment in the first place. So now we can't apply this principle in the same way. So we ironically try to uphold someone's autonomy while they don't have autonomy in that sense. And then we extend this whole legal process in an adversarial way. And the entire time that this happens, people get worse and their outcomes get worse, and they don't get the medication they need because they're just kind of in this custodial holding pattern.
And they're in a setting where they can do things while still sick that can worsen how they're viewed in the legal system or by other people who they're in that setting with, like, even very well intentioned. But like if someone attacked me and like punched me, I definitely would treat them different than someone who hasn't. Not even punitively, just like how warm am I gonna be? How long are we gonna talk for? If they move, and that's not even to say systems where maybe there's violence within jail or prison settings.
Yeah.
And it's funny that so we create these systems to uphold people's rights, but then we kind of hurt the very thing we set out to support by creating this convoluted bureaucracy that people have to navigate through.
Yes. And it burns out everyone involved, like trying to go through the system, the patient certainly, but all of the healthcare force that is involved in that waiting period and that adversarial hearing and all of that.
Could you tell us a little bit about kind of the clinical story of with this paper? I know has led and been part of the research and then advocacy that you're now part of. I wonder if you could tell, just for those who are maybe like less clear on like what would this actually look like? Because we're kind of talking in abstract. So maybe an example made up case or something where this how the systems are versus like what it would actually look like if we knew like took that there might not be capacity there, like better care would look like.
Yeah, no, I mean, so such an interesting you did a great job talking about the issues. And it every time I think about it, it sort of makes me think even more about, how to deal with this because it's complicated. Nobody is wrong in this situation. It's just that we are taking the healthcare perspective in this issue. And this is why psychiatry and law or medicine and the law are so interesting because we are all about well-being and the legal system is all about freedom. And this is probably the space in which we clash the most. And there's a lot of juicy conversation here. But I think in a lot of ways the system has shifted more towards freedom and upholding the rights of individuals who want to refuse treatment, which is fine, but that has repercussions. And as a forensic psychiatrist, and I have a lot of other psychiatrists that I'm starting to meet around the world that are seeing the same thing, is one of the side effects of that is this homelessness incarceration problem that we have, where people with mental illness that is left untreated because the individuals might not have insight into needing that care, um, cannot maintain housing, cannot maintain good relationships with their families, cannot hold their jobs, cannot maintain being a parent anymore. And if they're not getting the care, they're getting worse. And as psychiatrists, we know a lot of what happens when somebody remains untreated with mental illness. Not just does their illness get worse, they have a higher risk of accidents, a higher risk of suicide, a higher risk of violence, a higher risk of getting a traumatic brain injury, and lots of other comorbidities come along with untreated mental illness, like the kinds we're talking about. And so, um, what I found as a clinical doctor working in a carceral setting was that most of the time, when I was asked to do this clinical work or the forensic evaluation for an individual who was entangled with the law, had allegedly committed a crime, was that like, and I always say that feel like I was at the bottom of a well looking up at the system and where it failed the person. And it was patient after patient after patient. And it was almost which moment in time did they get off their meds and the system couldn't catch them and they ended up in the forensic hospital after something bad happened, right? Like it wasn't the homelessness route. It was you got, arrested for doing something.
Mm-hmm.
Then they're in this situation because they're so paranoid that their water is poisoned and that the FBI is after them, that they're running away from the FBI, they commit a crime, they end up in the hospital, and now they're refusing antipsychotic medication like Clozaril or an Invega Sustaina shot. These are two really great medications we know that work. And I can't get them to take that medication because they're too ill. They're too psychotic. They don't trust the reality around them to be real. And so what ends up happening is then if you can't medicate, you end up only medicating during emergency situations, like if they're assaultive or they get hurt by a patient or they're so unhygienic that they're getting sick from being unhygienic, which would be like hunger strikes or, never showering, not eating well. Like there's just a lot of things that happen with people who are experiencing psychosis that are really dangerous, and they deteriorate during that period of time. And so then you have to file to the courts to get medications. Not always, every state does it differently. Massachusetts has particularly a high threshold, and I'm not even going to get into the details, but my research is on those details. Of having an adversarial hearing and literally, being an expert that explains why you think the patient needs medication while the patient disagrees with you. And it's like you're having this adversarial hearing to provide them the medication they require to stabilize. And that delay to even forget the demoralization that happens to everybody, including the patient, the doctor, and everyone in between in that situation. But beyond that, the waiting period, and that is kind of where my research comes in, is there's so many adverse events that happen to the patient and the people around them during the waiting period while a patient is psychotic, that the society needs to understand that. Like, it is not okay to leave a patient untreated in a hospital for mental illness.
It's kind of like this false idea that I feel like comes up a lot in psychiatry and in the non-SMI population, but this idea of like, okay, it's either exposure to medication as like a risk or no risk of exposure to anything, when the reality is it's exposure of the side effects of medication and the reduction in autonomy, or it's not treating the illness worsening in the specific setting, which can be a lot of different things you've already mentioned, inherent to the illness and possibly inherent to the setting that they're in at that point. And it's not just, I don't want them to be forced to take meds. It's like you need to look at the global picture and context that they're in at that point.
Right. And I just want to add that one last piece of stigma that comes from the 1960s and 70s, like One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and like shock therapy and ECT. There's sort of this, in the language of standing up for autonomy for patients with mental illness, there's also this sort of like veiled psychiatrists are evil.
Right.
Well,
which we are. Just kidding.
Yeah, Margaret's evil. I'm a little bit evil.
Like, just walk around like with
witch.
Witch doctor. We're witches. Yeah, forcing medications. Like, we don't like to do this. Like, it is not fun. This is not the fun part of our job.
We did a burnout episode, and one of the moments we talked about for mine was when someone was like, I did a restraint, or like, I didn't even do the restraint. I just was like there for a child patient who was first break psychosis and like biting someone. Their parents were there, and their parents were upset, and And I got back to sign out at one point, and the non-psych resident was like, oh, you're psych. You must have loved that though. Like, not sarcastically.
Oh my God.
Yeah. See, you're like, I am evil, and yes, I did.
And you're like, as an evil witch, I did enjoy little children suffering under my guise.
Exactly. I went through all this medical school, and then psychiatry was
I
so
lured
evil.
them into
I
my
just had to
gingerbread
go
house.
into it. Yeah.
So, Jhilam, when you think about building institutional systems, a lot of them in the law from outside of the club seem to be built on these like fundamental philosophical principles. For example, the burden of proof in a criminal case is so high because we've determined that it's better for a guilty man to walk free than for an innocent man to be convicted. So when we think about that for treatment of these patients with psychotic illness, what do you think is worse? For a mentally ill patient to go untreated, or for an otherwise like healthier non-psychotic patient to be given medications against their will?
Mm,
Or
okay.
what's the number
That's
needed to
interesting.
treat, which is like people
Yeah.
don't want to say that, but that is like kind of what it
Yeah.
boils down to in some ways. Like,
And it's like, couldn't that question be posed to every medical specialty?
Mhm.
Right? But like, why, when it's psychiatry, it's like, yeah, but your medications are evil. So,
right.
But your
like,
illness is
So
like
therefore,
literally inside
that
itself.
anti-psychiatry movement really did a big. They did
Yeah.
a big one on us.
it did. I feel like we're all living under the baggage of that, and but it's not just psychiatrists that are.
Right.
It's like the world is. They,
Mhm.
and there are some really big. I really do think it's a human rights violation to incarcerate the mentally ill rather than to provide hospitals for them. And the unintended consequence of deinstitutionalization, and I'm not saying we need to create a million state hospitals. We can do this differently, but there was no other option outside. Once they deinstitutionalized these patients, there wasn't another plan. It didn't work because you actually have to talk a little bit about mandated treatment in this population, and people hate talking about that. And I kind of feel like I've landed in this weird spot where I end up talking about this a lot
Mhm.
because sometimes the way through stigma is to talk about it and why it's important, and to put it out in the open, like using the word restraint. Like everyone is like, "Ugh," like it's too stigmatized. But if we don't talk about it, we'll never fix this problem. We have to get through it.
You say that sometimes that's the way. I think that's the only way to get through stigma is to cast the spotlight on it and talk about it. Like, I think you spent a lot of your career literally pointing out elephants in rooms to people who are kind of beating around
Don't want
these
to talk
bushes.
about it.
Yeah, yeah. I'm a professional elephant spotter.
You are.
I feel like the not to go back to the society level and again bring dynamics into it, but there's the history of it. There's like the reality of what psychiatry has done in history. Although I would say if you look at other medical like history for things, there's been a lot of evil in other specialties too because they didn't know or because there were, bad players in there. But also that as you describe it, there's kind of a splitting off of the bad part into psychiatrists. Like if you psychiatrists are controlling and just psychiatrists in the 60s and 70s wanted to medicate and control people and in the, 40s and 50s do ice pick lobotomies and all these things
God
because
forbid
you
we
are
have
evil
hobbies.
and everyone else was good and the patients were actually secretly good in all settings and psychiatrists just were bad and controlling. And it's like, that is, probably true in a number of places. I think psychiatrists having to encounter their own evil urges as all humans is important. And I've said that. But like, I also think it's convenient if it's like, actually, if psychiatrists just hadn't been evil, there was no mental illness to begin with. Like, there
Mhm.
was no one who was trying
The
to.
denial.
Yes.
Mental
Yeah.
illness was invented by psychiatrists to
Got to
sell
spend money to make
antipsychotics.
money.
But it's that
Oh,
social denial of admitting that mental illness is true and it happens.
yeah.
It's easy to scapegoat a group of people that are providing care for that, and not that psychiatrists are. I'm just saying that there is this sometimes this subtext in this part of the conversation that it gets that way.
Yeah. No, I think I know we're nearing the end of the episode here. I wonder if which I'm sad we're not going to have time to talk about the gender disparity in cognitive load and emotional labor
Yeah.
to women physician burnout, which I would love to talk about, but for another day. Can you tell us a little bit about how this has translated in your research and your clinical work has translated now into the advocacy you're doing at the state level, as well as, outside of advocacy politically, advocacy through your leadership at MPS or the Massachusetts Psychiatry Society?
Yeah. Oh boy. That is sort of like a big brand. It's like this is one branch of kind of a lot of things that have led me to want to lead MPS, but I do think as a forensic psychiatrist and running a forensic fellowship that advocacy is a really big part of the work. As I said, it's CL for society. And really, what are you doing if you're educating social systems? You're sort of advocating for things, right? Is what I'm realizing that's kind of what this is at the end of the day, what we're doing, what I have found myself doing. And I feel like if I don't do it, others won't also follow me. I think there's this is going into cognitive load a little
I
bit, but
love it.
just to say that in a way, as a woman in my early mid career with young kids, taking on this role, I just maybe in a way want to role model it to other peers so that younger people want to lead things again. Professional societies, and just to really bring out this whole piece that we started with, is we're in a really messy time politically in the world. And we were doing a lot of canceling in 2020, 2021 of each other and getting rid of the APA and getting rid of like our medical societies and our professional societies. And we're like, we're going out on our own and doing our own thing. Great. But right now, we also need a very big physician voice as one to go up against the big forces that may get rid of science and may get rid of medicine. You don't know. So I think this is the moment to take on our professional societies, reshape them into the way we want to see them moving forward, because it's going to be different from what it was in the past because it wasn't quite working for us in this generation. Um, and shift and change and role model and get back involved in our professional societies so we do have a bigger voice in the political system speaking out on things. That's to answer the kind of bigger global question. Um, do I have time to talk about the kind of the way from like the correctional medicine and research that I ended up in advocacy?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So to answer
Kristen, do you have
your
a question? If you were going to say something,
No,
Kristen?
I'm
Okay.
I'm just responding to internal stimuli over here. I'm like, I'm thinking of things that are funny, and I'm like, okay, Preston, pay attention. Like, don't say anything.
really all of this to say is I just got really interested in why are we not treating people with mental illness in moments that we can, building systems that can. And I realized it was a lot of the stigma around the kind of care that is required
Mhm.
for this population when they lose insight. They end up in the legal system. We need to provide medications. You can't de-escalate psychosis. I've learned the hard way over many years of working the carceral system. I've seen many people try to de-escalate psychosis through like talking and
Reality checking.
yeah,
No
reality
amount
check.
of reason. It's like you're trying to use Disney bucks at a Caesar's Palace. You've just got the
Totally.
wrong currency, you know.
It's so true, but a lot of systems need education. Really needs psychiatrists actually to explain that. Like, actually, this person just needs medication and some time, and they're going to get better. Let me just tell you this psychosis is not de-escalatable right now. Um,
We're not going to
and
brief
so
CBT this out.
no, we're not going
brief
to brief
brief
CBT this out.
psychoanalytic.
Yeah,
12 sessions, just so we got it.
Just it's like this patient's decompensating. I need a Chase lounge and and a couple ink blots.
Okay, well, not too
Statners.
much again on psychodynamics.
Okay, sorry.
No,
I'll dial it back.
it all comes back to psychodynamics.
Not too
doesn't it?
much on it.
But really, to make a long story, a decade story short, it is my clinical like frustration with the situation ended up in doing research with trainees and getting people involved and understanding the issue. We did the research. It took a really long time to do it in a carceral setting because there's no good IRB situations in there, which are internal review boards to do research. Anyway, we finally got the research published. We're still doing research in this area. That research has really helped a lot of other mental health groups, at least in Massachusetts, say, oh my gosh, we've been seeing this issue. You have the data. Let's write the legislation now. And so we've written some legislation on the Timely Treatment Act, and we've written legislation with a lot of families who care a lot about this issue on assisted outpatient treatment. Massachusetts is one of two states that doesn't have any assisted outpatient treatment. either. Uh,
I think that's so beautiful that frustration is often the driver of this change. And that's how
yes.
it's true for me with the things I've advocated for as well. I think it's almost always driven by frustration or perceived injustice. So
Yes.
just kind of reflecting on that, and to anyone else who's listening, if you're frustrated with something, stay frustrated and then do something to change it.
And maybe I don't know if we still learn this word in psychiatry, but like sublimate it in a way.
Yeah.
Like do something constructive that gets people together and then everybody's kind of involved. And I have found like clinical education, research, and advocacy are all really one thing in this story. It comes from like seeing the problem, taking care of those people, doing the research, and then suddenly, like other people see it too, but they just don't have the research to back it up. And then you're off and running. And I started testifying on these bills while I was also involved in the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society.
Mhm.
Um, and it all came from the grassroots basically. And I realized what an amazing platform we have. And every state has one where like you can actually get involved with other psychiatrists. You can write your own legislation. We all hire lobbyists that work in the state house. And then you can actually testify on that legislation and have it go through the process to possibly become law. And that's like where I'm at right now, where like these two bills are going to be heard, along with other things, other issues that I really care a lot about. But Assisted Outpatient Treatment and Timely Treatment Act, these are both about to be heard again at the State House. I mean, they've lost multiple iterations, by the way, because Massachusetts.
When will they be heard again?
You
Like
knock
when
down 5, get up 6.
what
Yeah,
is
by
like
the way, this is a messy story. Yeah.
which I appreciated when you did the grand rounds that like this I think this is real advocacy, and also you and I have talked offline of like sometimes in med school or residency or other academic settings it can be like, oh, you should do research because you're a researcher, or you should be a leader because it's like you should be a leader because you feel like you're a leader. And I just so admire your story and resonate with it so much more as like you have come to this work because it mattered so much to you that it pissed you off. And
That really pissed me off.
yeah.
You know, I can't tell you, but I'll say that I don't think I've ever said this on air, but like it really pissed me off when I was getting cross-examined in the adversarial hearings on like, why do why do you think Haldol would work and not Zyprexa? And like questioning me on my medicine, like the choices. Like nobody in the room had any medical background, and they're just like questioning me on like I'm a bad guy for providing, Invega to somebody with psychosis. Like I was like, am I evil? Like I would have to do my own reality checks to be like, am I an evil
question mark.
psychiatrist? That really pissed me off. Oh my gosh. So yeah, that's what it takes.
And
That's what it takes.
when will it be? Do you have like a timeline of when it'll be up again?
Oh, that's a good question. No, we're waiting for a hearing date. I have learned. I just testified on decriminalizing psychedelics and smartphones in schools in the past 2 weeks, and I found out a week before that I had to testify. So
Wow.
you don't find out. You don't get a lot of advance notice. It turns out.
But it'll be sometime this fall.
I'm hoping this fall. Yes.
Well, this episode will be coming out late summer, I think, or early fall. So if you are in Massachusetts and you want to call your
Get
rep,
out and vote or
Get
tailgate.
involved.
vote, get involved.
Yes.
Be annoying professionally, which is what I view some of my work.
And honestly, you talk to so many, you have such an amazing audience of people who are at that grassroots training level or in healthcare, but maybe not in medicine. I just want to tell you, this story sounds like, oh, wow, she's, now advocating and president, but it came from just being in the mud and realizing that's where you really know what the problems are. You don't really know it if you're at the top and looking down. Like you really know it when you're in it. And don't underestimate what you're seeing right now and what's really kind of getting you kind of jolted up or getting under your skin, because that's real data on what might be your path.
Well, and I'm glad that I think your work is so important for the patients you see from a systemic level, but also knowing this is like a systems issue, to have you on and have people in healthcare and not in healthcare who listen to the podcast hear your work to inspire them towards their own advocacy and to understand a stigmatized group that I think even in the hospital setting, like someone comes in and there's any involvement of like mention of police or jail or prison or crime, I think people close up and this helps to open up those stories to be able to better treat people regardless of anything, because everyone deserves good treatment.
It's so true. And honestly, that's one of the reasons why now I'm at an academic center rather than in a forensic or prison setting, because I want to make it more accessible to trainees to see themselves doing that kind of work too. Like, oh, she's kind of this normal psychiatrist and she worked in a prison. Like, just try to make it more accessible and more
She's like
normalized.
she doesn't look dead in the eyes. Like
she's not dead in the eyes.
She's nice.
She doesn't have like claw marks on her neck.
She's not so evil.
Exactly.
Preston, do you have other thoughts? I'm sorry, I did interrupt Preston at one point to be like, no, shh. So I'm like apologizing.
No, that was a much needed redirection, I think. And Jhilam, you told it way better than I think I could. So the only conclusion I have is that we talked a lot about you being a Swiss Army knife at the beginning of this episode, but then I kind of had this realization towards the end is that you wear one hat, it just has many faces. So the consultant, advocate, educator, doctor are all kind of the same role here. And it's just which direction you turn, you are that thing to society, which I think in a way is like beautiful and poetic that you can be so many things in one thing at the same time. And really it's just the pursuit of justice that I think captures that. So I don't have anything else wrapping up for that.
That's really beautiful. And I think everybody has that. I think when you're just authentically being yourself and being the person, why did you come into medicine? Be that person and find that person again after all the training that like erodes all of that out of you. You slowly bring that person back and then you can wear all the hats and be the same person.
So as we wrap up, I know we've talked a lot about your advocacy already. Are there any specific things that you want to make sure you share or promote with your work?
We'll ask social people like their websites, their handles, but also when we had Dr. Funk on, we direct people towards her 2018 QTC resource paper. If there's anything that you would like people to read or look at, this is your chance to platform yourself that
Yes. Yes. So if you're interested, if you're in Massachusetts and you're interested in advocacy, of course, look at the Massachusetts Psychiatric Society's website. If you are an attorney and you need a forensic psychiatrist, I do that kind of work as it's www.psychexpertise.com. And lastly, if you're interested in some of this piece that I talked about around lacking insight and people with mental illness who end up in this homelessness, incarceration type cycle, and that level of criminal justice reform, which is really getting into the deepest issues, I think. I have come together with this amazing group of international psychiatrists and others, judges, attorneys, and we have just started a group called the International College of Neuroscience and Neuroethics called ICON. If you just Google ICON International College of Neuroscience or Neuroethics, either one, the website should come up. We just started it this year to start bringing more and more psychiatrists and other mental health professionals who really understand this issue to come together to start educating the world on why we need to treat untreated mental illness.
I love it. Wow. We will have all of those linked in our show notes. And
what about just movies you think everyone should watch?
Preston.
Or like a book that you're reading?
Oh, boy. The book I'm reading is Covenant of Water. Which
I've heard good things about it.
Recommend?
Yeah, it's a big one. It's a big book, and it's just so beautifully written. Abraham Verghese, second big novel. He's a internal medicine doctor.
And how do you not get burnt out?
Oh, I write about it. I write
Come back
about
for part
it.
2. Just kidding.
Oh my
No, well,
gosh.
thank you
Yes.
so all jokes aside, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know you are obviously very, very busy. And so it is really so great to be able to share your expertise and your voice in the field with our listeners.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is an honor. And it was just so fun to be with both of you in the same room and answering these awesome questions. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you, Jhilam, for being here. Thank you, Margaret, as always. Thank you to our listeners for listening, doing what you do best. Bring us along for your dog walks or car rides. If you liked the show, let us know. If you have other ideas, please reach out to us on howtobepatientpod.com or the Instagram.
Now, if you have other ideas.
We no longer accept critiques as of
as
this
evil
fiscal year.
psychiatrists, we no longer accept them.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's our new evil thing to do. Margaret and I's Instagram page is now up to like 2,300 followers.
Oh, yeah.
So if you want to grow How to Be Patient, you can also DM us there. It's a really easy way to reach out to us. Shout out to everyone else who's leaving the great feedback. I know you guys had a lot of questions about forensic psychiatry, and we tried to get through some of those today, and we'll kind of keep turning out more episodes with your requested topics. Full
And
episodes are...
Preston, I have a review for someone. We had a positive review back on Apple Podcasts. They said, must listen. I'm not going to read the whole thing because it's long and that would make me feel weird to read it. But I love listening to this podcast. So informative. I like the banter between you two. Listened on my long run today and it kept me entertained. So we love being part of your commute on Monday mornings when we release the episodes.
We entertain long runs. Okay, here's a new one that I got as a DM on Instagram. Honestly, I love you guys so much. You guys are honestly the best podcast that I've listened to yet. It's realistic, funny, and nice to hear from a clinical psychology student's POV.
And not evil.
Yeah, evil wasn't mentioned a single time in there. Thanks again for listening. We're your hosts, Preston Roche and Margaret Duncan. Our executive producers are me, Preston Roche, Margaret Duncan, Will Flannery, Kristen Flannery, Aaron Corney, Rob Goldman, and Shanti Brooke. Our editor and engineer is Jason Portizo. Our music is by Omer Ben-Zvi. To learn more about our program disclaimer and ethics policy, submission verification, and licensing terms, and our HIPAA release terms, go to our website, howtobepatientpod.com, or reach out to us at howtobepatient@human-content.com with any questions or concerns. All the cited articles will be listed in the show notes. How to Be Patient is a human content production.
How to be patient.
Thank you for watching. If you want to see more of us, or if you want to see, this is Lilac, she's my cat. She's going to be waving her hand at one of the floating boxes, which will lead to more episodes. Lilac, point to the other episodes. Lilac doesn't know what the internet is, but I swear they're there. They probably exist for real. But in the meantime, I'm just going to pet Lilac, and then I'm going to go dance in the background.